Imagine a 20-year-old woman taking the witness stand, and she's detailing how a product she started using at age 6 fundamentally rewired her brain.
Right.
Now imagine a jury listening to that exact testimony and actually agreeing with her, handing down a $6 million penalty. But, and here's the kicker, they didn't penalize the company for what other people said on the platform. They penalized the company because the platform itself was manufactured dangerously. We've got a really fascinating stack of sources for you today, diving into the March 26, 2026 morning briefing. And the overarching theme we are unpacking today is just massive. We're watching our limitless digital ambitions, just slam headfirst into hard, unforgiving physical, legal, and economic realities.
Yeah, the underlying thread connecting all these sources for me is that technology simply doesn't exist in a vacuum. I mean, every digital action, every algorithmic tweak, every single line of code eventually demands a physical toll or creates a human consequence. And what we're seeing today is basically the moment all those bills come due.
Exactly. And we're going to take you on quite a journey today. We're looking at that landmark lawsuit against big tech, the staggering physical energy demands of artificial intelligence, a global geopolitical standoff that's bottlenecking the tech industry, and some incredibly stealthy cyber threats hiding in plain sight.
It's a heavy stack.
It really is. So let's start with that Los Angeles jury verdict against Meta and Google. $6 million in compensatory and punitive damages for social media addiction. The plaintiff testified that she started using YouTube at age 6.
Wow, 6.
6 years old. And Instagram at 11. So, okay, let's unpack this. Because for years, we treated these platforms like digital town squares, right? If someone shouted something awful in the town square, you didn't sue the company that poured the concrete.
Right, you sued the person shouting.
Exactly. But this verdict flips that entirely. It treats the algorithm less like a public square and more like, I don't know, a children's toy painted with lead paint. The fundamental defect in the product's actual design.
What's fascinating here is that that is the exact legal pivot making this a landmark case. The conversation around social media liability has historically been just completely swallowed up by debates over content moderation and free speech.
Oh, for sure.
But the jury here, they bypassed the content entirely. They concluded that Meta and Google engaged in negligence regarding their product design. They basically ruled that these companies knew the endless scroll and the notification structures were dangerous to developing brains, failed to warn their users, and caused substantial psychological harm. This shifts the whole legal framework from treating tech giants as publishers to treating them as manufacturers of a defective physical product.
Which means the old defense of, hey, we just host the content, that suddenly doesn't hold up in court anymore.
Not when the architecture of the app itself is the thing causing the harm. And honestly, the $6 million is almost irrelevant to a company like Meta.
Right, that's a rounding error for them.
Exactly. The real earthquake here is the precedent. There are roughly 2,000 similar lawsuits pending right now. So to avoid catastrophic, compounding legal defeats, the industry is going to be forced into rapid, hard-coded changes. We are talking mandatory age verification hurdles that actually work and hard-coded daily time limits built right into the operating systems.
And what's wild is how quickly this is already trickling down to your local community.
Yeah.
When you look at the education sources we have today, schools aren't even waiting for the tech companies to update their apps.
No, they're not.
They're just locking it down entirely. 16 states are currently weighing severe limits or outright bans on educational technology in classrooms. Tennessee and Kansas are proposing complete statewide prohibitions on edtech for grades K through 5.
Wow, complete bans.
Yeah, outright bans. And Virginia just passed Senate Bill 568, mandating model policies that strictly limit instructional screen time by grade level.
The K through 5 demographic is the really critical focus there. Educators and child psychologists are looking at the developmental windows for young kids and realizing that the experiment of the last decade basically failed. I mean, for years, administrators have been fighting this uphill battle, right? Trying to institute phone bans or block certain platforms on school Wi-Fi.
Oh, yeah, and facing huge pushback from parents.
Exactly. Parents who want their kids connected at all times.
Right, because the whole put an iPad in every hand era, that was the gold standard for a modern classroom just a few years ago. If you didn't have screens, you were falling behind.
But this Los Angeles jury verdict gives school administrators the exact legal ammunition they need. They can now point to a court of law and say, look, we aren't just being strict. A jury has legally determined these platforms are inherently addictive and harmful to young users.
Mhm.
It provides the political cover to just rip the screens out of the elementary schools.
So we have the legal system throwing a massive roadblock in front of the attention economy. But, it isn't just the law catching up to tech, it's the physical power grid itself. Which brings us to the infrastructure bottleneck.
Yeah, this is a huge one.
The sheer amount of electricity required to train and run these new AI models is just staggering, and it's prompting serious legislative action. Today's sources highlight the Artificial Intelligence Data Center Moratorium Act, which was introduced by Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Right.
This bill would completely halt all new AI data center construction in the U.S. until sweeping federal protections for workers, consumers, and the environment are passed. And they aren't an outlier here. Over 100 local communities in 12 states have already enacted their own localized data center moratoriums.
Well, the local pushback is intensely practical. It's driven entirely by utility bills. These hyperscale data centers, they draw massive continuous amounts of power. So when a new one opens in a mid-sized town, it strains the local grid.
Which forces the utility companies to build more generation capacity.
Exactly. They spin up more capacity, and those costs are invariably passed down to everyday residents. So the physical hardware required to sustain the cloud is literally taking money out of the pockets of local communities.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate here for a second, because the counter-argument you hear from the tech sector and from lawmakers across the aisle is all about global leverage. They argue that if we artificially cap our own compute power just because of electricity costs, aren't we basically handing the keys to global AI leadership straight to international competitors? Like, we are seeing defense experts warning that throttling data center construction essentially surrenders the technological Cold War to China.
It is a massive economic and national security dilemma, no doubt about it. But if we connect this to the bigger picture and try to understand why energy is such a critical, unavoidable choke point at this exact moment, we have to look at the geopolitical map. Our sources show that Iran has just formally rejected a 15-point U.S. ceasefire proposal, which was delivered via diplomatic back channels through Pakistan. And Iran didn't just walk away from the table. They issued 5 incredibly strict conditions for even considering an end to the conflict.
Including demands for war reparations and guarantees against future attacks, right?
Yes. But the most critical condition they laid out, the one that really shakes the global markets, is their demand for absolute Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz.
Wow. Over the Strait of Hormuz. That is huge.
It's the linchpin of the global economy. Roughly a fifth of the world's entire oil supply is shipped right through that strait. By leveraging control over that specific physical choke point, Iran is sending global fuel prices absolutely surging.
And we're seeing Secretary of State Marco Rubio heading to the G7 to try and build a unified response.
Right. He's heading to France this week to build ally support. But in the meantime, the ripple effect of those surging oil prices is hitting the tech industry like a sledgehammer.
Because the cloud runs on electricity. And despite all the green initiatives, baseload electricity generation is still heavily tethered to global fossil fuel markets. So these data center operators are getting crushed by rising operating costs at the exact moment they desperately need to expand.
Which accelerates this really desperate push within the tech sector to secure their own independent renewable energy sources. We're talking localized nuclear microreactors or dedicated solar grids.
Just to get off the main grid.
Exactly. They're realizing they cannot afford to have their critical digital infrastructure held hostage by naval standoffs and shipping routes in the Middle East.
It is a perfect storm of physical limitations. And it seems like, alongside these hard energy constraints, the AI market itself is facing a brutal reality check. Just look at OpenAI. They just announced they are shutting down their Sora video app.
Yeah, that was shocking.
I mean, this is a massive, highly publicized text-to-video launch, and they're pulling the plug just 6 months later.
Well, the underlying metrics tell the story of a bursting bubble. App downloads crashed from 3.3 million in November down to just 1.1 million by February.
A huge drop.
But the fatal blow was corporate adoption. Disney officially pulled out of a $1 billion investment and licensing agreement with the tool.
$1 billion evaporating overnight. That shows that the consumer and corporate appetite for just An endless feed of AI-generated video just isn't what the industry projected. And honestly, I think this is a vital digital literacy lesson for you, the listener, and for schools especially. We are constantly sold the narrative that every new AI tool is an unstoppable revolution.
Hmm.
But students and professionals need to know which tools are actually stable and which are just shiny novelties before they integrate them into their daily workflow.
That stabilization problem connects directly back to the classroom reality we discussed earlier. Public school enrollment is declining nationally, and our sources show that 23 states are projecting flat or declining general fund spending for fiscal year 2026.
So they have zero extra money.
None. Schools are financially desperate for reliable technology to help fill severe staffing and tutoring gaps. But instead of getting a unified, helpful solution, they are battling a wave of students using AI to cheat on assignments.
So the initial honeymoon phase, where everyone was just amazed that a chatbot could write a decent essay, that is completely over.
Entirely over. The focus across educational institutions and the corporate world is shifting from simply providing access to these tools to strict accountability and governance frameworks. They're trying to redesign academic integrity in a world where the technological ground just keeps shifting beneath them.
And that desperation for accountability is echoing at the highest levels of government right now. We've got two major kind of clashing pieces of AI regulation in the sources today. First, the Trump administration released a national AI policy framework. It outlines 7 recommendations for Congress, and the stated goal is to create uniform national guardrails. But the key mechanism here is federal preemption. The framework explicitly aims to stop individual states from making their own AI rules.
Right, and federal preemption is highly favored by the tech industry. It means Washington tells the states, hey, you cannot set up your own regulatory toll booths. Companies want a single, uniform highway of rules to navigate, rather than trying to comply with 50 different state laws, which they argue stifles innovation.
Right. But right alongside that framework, the U.S. just passed the AI Accountability Act. And this takes a much more granular, aggressive approach. It requires companies that deploy AI in highly consequential areas, specifically hiring, lending, healthcare, and criminal justice, to conduct and publicly release regular bias audits.
Which mirrors the EU AI Act.
Exactly, which went into full enforcement at the start of the year. So suddenly, companies face intense compliance and auditing requirements on both sides of the Atlantic.
It creates a fascinating friction.
Yeah.
Because on one hand, you have a push to clear the runway for innovation with uniform federal rules. But on the other, you have strict, punitive auditing requirements forcing companies to constantly prove their algorithms aren't discriminating against loan applicants or medical patients.
Which is obviously vital for consumer protection. But there is a deeply sobering counterpoint to all of this regulation. Because while legitimate tech companies and schools are spending massive amounts of time and money on bias audits and compliance frameworks, the criminal underworld is just thriving. We have a new report from Interpol showing that AI-enhanced fraud is now 4.5 times more profitable than traditional cybercrime methods.
It's the ultimate asymmetric warfare problem. The exact same AI capabilities that power a legitimate corporate productivity tool can be seamlessly weaponized.
Yeah.
Attackers are using generative AI to imitate trusted executives on video calls, dynamically mask their network activity, and generate highly convincing, personalized phishing content at an industrial scale. The regulations we just talked about, they only slow down the organizations that actually choose to follow the law.
Which brings us to the cybersecurity sources. Because when we dive into how these attackers operate, we see exactly how they are bypassing our traditional rules. Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's talk about the GlassWorm Chrome extension campaign.
Oh, this one is wild.
Attackers are installing a malicious browser extension that silently logs your keystrokes and steals your session tokens. But the way the malware receives its instructions from the hackers is brilliant. They are hiding their command and control servers inside Solana blockchain memos.
It is a phenomenal, highly evasive tactical evolution.
Right, think of it this way. Imagine a gang of bank robbers leaving coded instructions for their next heist spray-painted on a famous public monument. Everyone walking by can see the text, but no one realizes it's a blueprint for a robbery. And because the Solana blockchain is completely decentralized and immutable, cybersecurity authorities can't just raid a server farm and unplug it. The hacker's instructions are permanently etched into the public ledger for the malware to read.
And that level of evasion isn't an isolated incident. We're also tracking a new WebRTC payment skimmer that is absolutely terrorizing e-commerce right now. It exploits a specific vulnerability called Polyshell in Magento and Adobe Commerce systems.
Let's break down how that actually works for a second.
Mm,
Think of your company's online checkout page. Attackers have found a backdoor, that polyshell vulnerability, that lets them bypass the security guard and upload a tiny, invisible credit card skimmer directly into the shopping cart's code.
yeah.
So to the customer, the checkout looks totally normal, but the attacker is silently siphoning the credit card data in real time.
Exactly. It requires zero authentication to exploit, and mass automated attacks are already underway globally. If your workplace runs e-commerce on those platforms, patching your systems immediately is an absolute non-negotiable priority.
Definitely.
And, the threats aren't just exploiting code, they're exploiting human psychology. Take the massive device code phishing campaign currently hitting over 340 organizations on Microsoft 365.
Right, this one relies entirely on tricking the user. Device code authentication is a legitimate feature. Like if you ever tried to log into a streaming app on your smart TV and the TV tells you to go to a website on your phone and type in an 8-digit code, that is device code authentication.
What these attackers are doing is sending urgent phishing emails telling users they need to re-authenticate their work accounts. They provide a link and a code. When you type that code into your phone or laptop, you think you are authenticating your own secure login.
But you're not.
No, in reality, you are authenticating a login session on the attacker's machine halfway across the world. You are manually handing them the keys to your corporate network, completely bypassing multi-factor authentication.
It all comes down to vulnerabilities. Software vulnerabilities, psychological vulnerabilities, but we also have to confront physical hardware vulnerabilities. Morgan Stanley is projecting that global smartphone shipments are going to drop 13% in 2026.
That's a huge drop for that market.
It is. It's a massive market contraction driven by economic headwinds, but also by a shift in consumer behavior. People are simply holding on to their devices much longer. Our hardware is aging.
And we tolerate that aging hardware in our personal lives. We accept a bit of lag on a 4-year-old smartphone as a fair trade-off to save money. We carry that consumer technical debt. But when that exact same mindset, the reluctance to invest in modernization, is applied to massive institutional infrastructure, the consequences are deadly.
Which brings us to a deeply tragic event in the sources today. A Colombian Air Force C-130H Hercules aircraft crashed into the jungle near the Peruvian border, killing at least 66 of the 128 people aboard. It is a horrific loss of life. But the detail that demands attention is that this aircraft was 42 years old. It was a legacy system donated by the U.S. in 2020.
An official investigation is underway to determine the exact mechanical or pilot failures. But on a macro level, this tragedy forces allied nations to confront a devastating question. What is the true human cost of maintaining legacy systems instead of investing in modernization?
Right.
Whether it's a 42-year-old transport plane, a degrading national power grid, or a legacy hospital IT system vulnerable to those ransomware attacks we discussed, physical infrastructure decays. We constantly treat infrastructure as a sunk cost that we can just keep patching with duct tape and software updates, but eventually the physical reality breaks down and the results are catastrophic.
It is a profound reminder that we cannot outcode physical decay. All right, before we wrap up this massive deep dive, let's take a quick breath and spin around the digital water cooler. We want to give you a rapid-fire rundown of what the internet is actually fixating on today, just to capture the full pulse of the digital world.
It's quite a chaotic mix out there today. X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, experienced a major global outage this morning, with over 10,000 users simultaneously reporting issues loading their feeds or posting content.
And while X was struggling to stay online, the rest of the internet was locked in a viral debate involving comedian Drewski and late-night host Jimmy Kimmel, who sparked a massive backlash over some controversial broadcast commentary last night.
We're also tracking a massive, mysterious worldwide trend involving Harry Potter and the character Snape. It appears to be driven by an anniversary event or a coordinated new content drop that has completely hijacked entertainment algorithms.
And finally, sports fans are absolutely furious over NBA referee Scott Foster, who made a highly controversial, game-altering call during a high-profile matchup last night. It is a perfect snapshot of the internet. Massive infrastructure outages living right alongside celebrity drama, nostalgia, and sports rage.
It certainly keeps things interesting.
All right, let's pull all of this together. We took you on quite a journey today, but the through line connecting all these disparate sources is undeniable. We are witnessing a massive society-wide recalibration. We looked at powerful algorithms finally having to answer to human juries in that meta lawsuit. We saw AI's explosive theoretical growth slamming into the hard ceilings of global energy markets and shifting consumer demand. We explored how agile cybercriminals are innovating faster than any national regulation or bias audit can keep up with. And we confronted the tragic, fatal reality of aging physical infrastructure demanding an overhaul we can no longer afford to delay.
So I'll ask you, the listener, what stands out to you? In a world where the limitless virtual frontier and the constrained physical world are colliding this violently, where do you see the next breaking point?
It's the perfect question. Because, we've spent the last 20 years acting as though the digital world was this infinite, frictionless frontier. We believed there were no borders, no physical limits, just endless expansion into the cloud. But as today's sources prove, the cloud still runs on earthly power that can be choked off by a geopolitical standoff in the Middle East. Algorithms still have to answer to a jury of regular people in Los Angeles. And all of our sleek digital innovation is entirely tethered to aging physical metal. If the virtual world's expansion is suddenly being dictated by the physical world's strict limits, wait, let me rephrase that. If the virtual world's expansion is suddenly being dictated by the physical world's strict limits, are we entering an era of a shrinking internet? Something for you to mull over today as you navigate your own digital and physical worlds. Thank you so much for taking the time to get well informed with us. Stay curious, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.